Dear friends, hi everybody. I'm particularly happy to welcome Robert Picard to our topical seminar. And I know that Robert was one of the first great scholars who started collaboration with the Faculty of Journalism in these new post-Soviet times of Russia. I do remember how I met Robert in Finland, where he worked in Turku and where he established a very successful group of media economists. And I was really happy to meet these people. Robert influenced scholars in Russia, like all over the world. And his book, Media Economics, published in 1989, became a starting point for the generations of scholars in media economics. So we are very happy to open this meeting, this topical seminar, which Faculty of Journalism is conducting in 2021, is a new format of collaboration of well-known foreign scholars and Russian academicians. And I'm really personally very happy to see Robert in this good shape, in this good mood, and we are very excited to start this event. Let me ask my colleague, Anna Gladkova, to be a kind of moderator of this seminar. Anna is the coordinator for international relations. She's like Vice Dean for International Cooperation at the Faculty of Journalism. Because I have the privilege and the happiness to talk after Robert. Anna, please, and maybe you also guide us in terms of time, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Vartanava, and good afternoon, dear colleagues. It is my pleasure to see you virtually, to welcome you here virtually at the Journalism Faculty of Moscow State University. As Professor Vartanava mentioned, we are very lucky and fortunate to be conducting this series of topical seminars for the second semester already. And we organize them once a month with leading scholars from different countries. And today, just as usual, we will have two great talks. One will be given by international scholar, Professor Robert Picard, and another will be given by Russian scholar, Professor Elena Vartanava. And just as usual, we suggest we leave around 15 up to 20 minutes for each talk. Then we have normally a discussion of like 15 up to 20 minutes. So if you have any questions, I suggest you either raise your virtual hand at the end of both talks, or you can simply type your questions in the chat box and we take them after both talks. So I guess that's all in terms of organizational procedures of our seminar. So since it's already 4 p.m., 5 minutes after 4, I suggest we start our seminar. And Professor Vartanava, would like to introduce Professor Picard yourself, or shall I do that?
I would be happy if you do this, because I had some very personal, emotional memories, but maybe you do it in a more formal way, please.
Sure. So it is my very big pleasure and honor to introduce you Professor Robert Picard. Robert, it's my pleasure to see you. Thanks very much for being in touch with me. Thanks for all your help with organizing and preparing for this seminar. And now I would like to mention that Professor Robert Picard is Senior Research Fellow at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at University of Oxford. He is also a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and a Fellow at the Information Society Project at Yale University Law School. His scholarship focuses on the nexus between economic of media and communication systems and public policy. He has been a professor for 4 decades at universities in Europe and United States, and he also taught at both University of Oxford and Harvard University. He is the author and editor of 33 books and has been editor of the Journal of Media Business Studies and the Journal of Media Economics. Professor Picard received his PhD from University of Missouri in Columbia, and he had postdoctoral study and fellowships at University of Pennsylvania, Harvard University, and University of Oxford. He has conducted and consulted and carried out assignments for governments in North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, and for international organizations, including the European Commission, UNESCO, and the World Intellectual Property Organization. He has been a consultant for leading media companies in North America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So I would like to give the floor now to Professor Picard, and just to say once again how happy and how lucky and how fortunate we are to welcome you here at the journalism faculty of Moscow State University. And we are very much looking forward to seeing you hopefully here also in person when the situation allows. Thanks very much for being here, Professor Picard. The floor is yours now. If you want to share slides, please do that. Thank you. Professor Picard, you are muted. Professor Picard, we can't hear you. You are muted.
Mute. There it is. Okay. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to meet with fellow communication scholars and to be able to chat about issues that are important to all of us and to exchange those views. And I appreciate, Anna, all the work you've done in creating this, and Elena for the opportunity to be back together working with you again. We all know that technology is changing communications at a very rapid pace and is continuing to do so. And it's important sometimes to stop and take a few moments pause to really think about the implications of those and what they mean for the way we work and how we go about trying to deal with the problems facing us in the world of communications and the media companies that we often are asked to assist. And so that's what I want to do today, is just look at some of the contemporary trends, talk about some of their implications, and then indicate how that is affecting the strategy of communications in many companies, and where we need to be thinking in the future and what we need to be thinking about. Now, the first and most important trends is that screens are now the primary technology for our content and our communication. This is the first time in human history where oral or print communications have dominated. This has enormous implications for communications, but a lot of sociological implications that we have not yet fully understood. It is changing the way that humans receive and exchange information, the way they interact with each other, and what kinds of information and materials are available to them. All of those lead to profound changes in the way individuals interact and the way societies interact and make decisions in their own societies. And I'm not going to be able to tell you what those are, what the effects of all of those are, because nobody knows. And it's a great deal of research by communication and sociological scholars that yet needs to be done to fully understand what these mean to individuals and society. The other thing we need to understand is that all of the platforms of communications, it used to be print, it used to be audio, it used to be television, all of those are now being supplanted by internet-based connections and thus distribution in a different way. And underlying communication systems today are now all based to connect for internet distribution. Telephone switching systems, for instance, today have all been changed. So the switches are now all digital-based for internet distribution. And the dominant means of how we are dealing with data and data management and other things are all related to the internet connections and what is necessary to make that work. That is hugely important, because what that has done is made everything available on every potential platform, and the ability to send it anywhere in the world who wants to receive it and is willing and able to receive it. So that change is enormous, because it means the infrastructures are becoming in place to be able to do this in a way that weren't there 20 years ago, and even 10 years ago. And that is connecting people in different kinds of ways to different kinds of material and content that they hadn't had before. If you can't receive a television broadcast, you can bring it in under an internet system. That kind of change is immense in terms of how we operate with communications. Mobile, and this is probably one of the most important, particularly changes of the last 15, 20 years, where it's really become significant with smartphones. They are now the dominant means that people get personal communications taken care of, and the way we have mediated communications taking place. More communications flows through mobile systems than any other technology. And the interesting thing about mobile phones is these are personal communication devices. In the past, we used to have household devices, a radio that everybody in the household listened to, a television that everybody watched. These are very personal devices, and there are multiple ones in homes, and people use them in different ways. We're dealing with a technology that has very small screens, obviously, and this tends to promote short form communication and reading of short form material rather than long form material. That has a lot of implications about how information flows and about how our attention spans are affected and how our ability to read long form communications takes place. Mobile phones are also promoting video consumption. So much material that used to be information oriented that was in text is now being turned into video. Much interpersonal communications is now becoming video based. We see this through the rise of a lot of things like TikTok and others, and a lot of the news that is being distributed as video clips rather than as text-based clips. All of those are very important changes that are simply because mobile is the platform of choice for most people, because it's there with them all the time. And so they can use it at any time to access what they want. Now, social networking, of course, was a big part of this. And social networking has made it possible that you no longer have to have a large organization behind you to be able to create and distribute content widely. And so this has allowed many more people to become active in creating and distributing content. Some of that content is very good because the technologies that are now in phones and computers and others have brought in many of the skills that previously only professionals had available to them. And very good amateurs can produce very good material that competes. And that's why on many social media platforms, we have a wide range of influencers, of others that are creating and serving millions of people with information and ideas and entertainment that they are producing in and of themselves. So social media is giving that opportunity. The interesting thing about social media is that it is an interpersonal form of communication, but it is also partly mass communication. So it falls over between the two. And we've not had a lot of experience in the past between communications that move between interpersonal and mass communications very fluidly. And we're learning a lot these days about social media and about its impact because many people, including those of you that are on this seminar, are doing the research so we understand what that means and how that works. The other thing about media consumption is it's become very more active and connected, much more individualized. We can choose what we want. We have it connected so that we can interact with content sometime. We can bring it forward, move it backwards. We can stop it if we want to look at something a little better. We can interact in a variety of different ways with it. You see a product on a television show you're watching, you can actually order it on the screen. I mean, that's a different kind of environment than we existed even 10 years ago. And it is making individual choices very much what is driving media distribution today and media use today. And that individualized consumption becomes hugely important to us. Because we're not used to thinking in individual terms in media. Traditionally, we have only thought in large group audience terms, and that is disappearing very rapidly as the primary driver of media distribution, consumption, and choices and in content along the way. And so we are now in this really high choice media markets where, you know, it used to be we had 2, 3 television stations available to us. There are now hundreds that are available. We used to have only broadcast stations. Now we have streaming services. This is happening in all media, whether it be in radio or otherwise. I no longer listen to radio. I listen to streaming radio simply because I can get streaming or satellite radio that gives me really close choices to the kind of music and topics that I'm most interested to. That's changing the way we all work. And it means that the media no longer control the environment. It used to be media controlled the environment, states controlled the environment, but they can't anymore because of this high choice that exists there. And so it's while they can influence what is there, the control is no longer in the people that are making the content available. And that is a massive change in the communication systems from what we had 50 years ago even. What is happening today for media companies in this environment is they're no longer just competing against traditional competitors or traditional media firms, but against all those firms and all those individuals who are now producing on their own. There are many musicians, there are many actors, there are many other people that are producing and putting things into media today that could never have done that before. And they're being able to do it without the big media companies. It's useful to have the big media companies, but it's not required anymore. And what we see is that all of the big media companies today are really trying to get the attention of the audience and to get frequent contact. Newspapers used to, you know, talk to their audiences once a day, usually in the morning. That's no longer effective for them. They have to be talking to them throughout the day, and digital makes that kind of possible. Broadcast content alone is no longer effective for broadcasters. They're having to link other materials. They're having to link sports stats. They're having to link background information about the actors. They're having to link all kinds of information that people want to watch or receive while they are watching a particular film. If you're watching a classic 50-year-old film, and maybe you want to get a little more information about one of the actors, you can click on the screens more and more and be able to get that information. And so broadcasters and streamers are having to adjust to that to say, we're no longer just broadcasting the content. We've got that content plus what we're adding to the content. Magazines used to talk to their readers, you know, once a month with a print edition of the magazine. Now they want it to be daily through digital as well. And so all of these are becoming hugely important. And what is happening is all of this becomes available. It increases the amount of contacts that are out there. It increases the amount of content that are out there. And what it is doing is diluting the media brands, because the platforms and other companies and the search firms and the aggregators are really becoming the gateways to content. And that becomes hugely important, because the media brands used to be where people always went. We went to channel 1 or channel 2. Now they go to a digital gateway that takes them to the broadcast of channel 1 or channel 2, but to 100 others. And so that brand is while it's still important, because you may choose to follow that brand, you don't go to the brand as your first place of landing, and you have then many other choices you can do. The total time spent with media is increasing. That's one of the things that's happening with all of this plethora of information. Very few people are substituting one type of media or device for another's. There's a lot of simultaneous news use going on. We'll be working with 2 or 3 different things at the same time. Maybe doing different things, maybe doing related things along with them. And that is pushing up the total media time use. And mobile phones are one of the primary reasons that is occurring. And what this is doing to us is that it is forcing people to try to figure out, how do we cope with this wave of information and content that's coming? It's just too much for us to deal with. We could never be able to make all the choices that we have to. So a lot of content is being ignored. A lot of people are confining their primary use to just a few sources or a few locations. There are efforts now to get much better search activities and search guides based on your past experiences along the way. But there's a lot that needs to be done to make that a lot better than what it is today. And what all of this is doing is making it very difficult for firms that are working in media firms to connect with the audiences. It used to be very easy. If you were one of 3 television stations and you carried advertising, you had a great audience and you could connect very easily with them. You can't do that anymore. It just doesn't work along there. There's a schism that is there because there are now many more providers that you can use instead of one or another. And so what's happening is media audiences are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So newspaper circulations are going down. Television viewing, if you look at individual channels, their viewing is going down. Motion pictures, television programs that are streamed, other things, smaller and smaller audiences along the way. And that is hard to monetize. So if you're in the business of media and your business is based on large audiences, and each of your channels keeps getting smaller and smaller audiences, you have very few choices that you can do, except to maybe buy a whole bunch of channels or a whole bunch of media and try to aggregate a larger audience across the different ones, rather than across individual channels. And so individuals are really going to very few places to get content today. And much of the content they're getting is not streaming. It's disaggregated content that they pick up from here or there, or they get a link from here or there, and they go to it. And so that is making it much harder for the producers of that content or the original sources of that content to monetize it. And that's why there's so many disputes today over copyright, over the role of platforms and social media and sharing content and who should be paying whom. All of those huge things are occurring because of this disaggregated use and the difficulties in making money. And so what you see when you start looking at media content is that there's a big shift in control going on in media. It used to be in print media, you had a huge amount of producer control, radio had pretty good control, audio recordings were fairly controlled by the producers, television was not as controlled by the producers because there were independent producers or other producers that were there. And then, you know, as you got into home recordings, you get into multi-channel television, as you get into internet and stuff, the control from the producers starts going down. And what it's shifting to is this consumer control. And legacy media are having more and more trouble adapting because those that are here at this end of the producer control, they don't have the same mindset as the people that have existed in this environment where there was always a lot of consumer control over the last 15, 20 years. So that's creating a lot of shift in media, and a lot of shift in thinking in media is having to take place. And what that shift is that if you're serving smaller audiences, if you are serving individuals and individual choices, you've got to know about those individuals. You've got to know about their motivations, their expectations, their interests, their tastes, their individual lives, the social contexts in which they use different kinds of media, the locations where they're watching or viewing. All of those things become hugely important along the way. And so what we're seeing is this switch from this audience-centric approach that was the approach of the 20th century to this consumer-centric approach of the 21st century. And instead of focusing on aggregate groups of people, we're now looking at individuals. Instead of emphasizing content that's just attractive to the largest group of people, we're now looking at content that's attractive and useful to individuals or small groups of people. The audience-centric really supported an advertising-based business model. The consumer-centric does away with it. And so in order to make things work in a consumer-centric thing, you have to have much better data on the individuals, and you have to have much better tracking of the individuals who are dealing with that media. And this is why we have so much emphasis being placed today on tracking consumers through digital connections, whether it be on the internet, whether it be on their phones, whether it be on their television sets. It's because the consumer-centric requires that to get the business models that currently are being used. And so when we look at all of this and we look at the future for media and communications, we really don't know where we're going and what's going to happen. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. There's a lot of dangers that mistakes can be made by media companies, and we're seeing a lot of media companies fail or be absorbed by others. There are a lot of rewards out there as well if you can get it right in the environment there, but it's a very uncertain environment in which we have to be very careful in how we operate and the decisions that we make and the strategies we get. So where is this taking us? And this is the question that everybody wants to know. Unfortunately, they want to know, what do I do today for my company? We're not yet really able to tell that, and that's why strategies are changing very rapidly in companies. But there are some things that we know where we're going. And the first is, we know there's going to be ever increasing competition for viewers, readers, and users. It's not going to get less, it's going to get worse. There's going to be more people out there trying to reach those people, individuals, directly. And so we have to be prepared for that if we're operating media and communication systems, that's going to go on. And we want to, of course, obviously be in the best position as a brand, the best position as a provider to be able to benefit from that situation. We know the audience sizes are going down, which means our advertising-based strategies are not going to be continually work. That doesn't mean there won't be some advertising based, but more and more we're switching to consumer payments for communications, simply because that gives us a much better base than the advertising base today, because it's harder and harder to match the advertising with the users. We're finding changes in success in some types of content provision. Some are doing much better in where they are than others are. And so we're finding now, for instance, that independent production of television and film is doing very well in a digital environment, mainly because streaming services are available all around the world, many international services and national services that are needing locally produced content to be successful. We know that print newspapers are not being very successful anymore, but their digital operations are getting more and more successful. So there are shifts going on. And so we need to always be tracking and thinking about those shifts. And those shifts will continue. And we have to be watching them because they will inform decisions for media companies in the future. The business models are changing and the revenue sources are changing. As I said, people are paying more and more money for the content that they get because they are making the choices for the content that's most valuable for them. If you look in most of Europe and most of the world actually today, most newspapers, for instance, or news organizations, as they're calling themselves now because they operate on multiple platforms, used to have in the second half of the 20th century a model that was based on half or more of the content coming from advertising and the rest from circulation. That today, on average, the majority of it comes from circulation sales. But most businesses today have multiple models. They sell services, they sell tickets, they sell content directly to people. They host events. Some of them run sports bars. Some of them, they're doing many different things to try to bring income in to get the business model. So it's not the simplistic models that we had in the late 20th century. Late 20th century, you were either paid for by the state or by the party. You were paid for by the advertisers or by some combination of advertisers and consumers. And that was pretty much it. Today, there are scores of business models, and they work differently in different countries for different types of media. So you can't say, here's the business model that's going to make you a success. You have to find the one that's right for you. Media operations are getting smaller. And by that, if you are a newspaper newsroom, you're getting smaller. If you're a magazine newsroom, you're getting smaller. But the companies behind them are getting larger because they need to operate not only that magazine, but digital portals. They need to operate on social media. They need to have material put out in a variety of different ways. They need to operate websites. Many times they're off doing television programs. So these companies are getting bigger, but the individual operations have fewer and fewer people in them because the people are shifting into other types of operations. And we are seeing, and this is particularly important for people that are looking for employment, is that there's a growing reliance of communications firms on independent and freelance content producers, not typical traditional employment. And this has a great deal of implications. It essentially means that if you're an independent producer, you need to own the content you produce, and it doesn't belong to the people that distribute it or use it, or you can never make any money. If you're a freelance content producer, you need to have the decent wages and decent rates along the way, and you need to have social benefits and others that make that work, or it's not going to work. And yet more and more firms are relying on these, but not creating the social environment that supports this in a very significant way. And so there's a lot of policy activity going on in these fields about who can own content, whether a broadcaster that doesn't produce it can ever own it or only get the rights to it. All of those kind of issues are huge and important in this environment, and we'll see that. And all of this means that if you're working in communications and media, you really have to have highly skilled management there. And you need people that can make informed decisions and know what the different options are for them to come onto. So as we come to a close here, I mean, there are really issues we are looking at now. There's a lot of research going on in these areas because they're so important. The first has to do with the large platforms and operating systems that are out there. The Netflixes, the TikToks, the Facebooks, all of these, Googles, all of these are hugely important. In many countries, they have their own systems that are also monopolies. Or near monopolies, at least for local content. That's also a problem along the way. So all of these are creating interfacing systems that are pulling off a large amount of the economic value of what is produced in media. And that's becoming a problem for the producers. And so you're seeing an awful lot of anti-cartel work and competition law work being done in this area to try to break down the power of some of those operating systems and platforms. A lot of privacy breaches going on by the data gathering and by the algorithms that are being used in trying to track the behavior of individuals. And a lot of that data is being collected without people knowing it's being collected, and it's being used in a lot of ways that are actually against the interests of individuals. Sometimes we have just data breaches where data on individuals gets out and allows all kinds of issues with identity problems and other such things. There's a lot of effort being made, a lot of policy because the systems that are there and the way to track people online allow trolling and stalking and threatening of people. There's a lot of discussion of how journalists are targeted in that way, and yes, they are, but most of the targeting is non-journalist. But it's there, and it's all using the same systems, and the systems are making it happen. So efforts are trying to be made to how do we make this clear. There's a great deal of thought going into what do we do about controlling misinformation and disinformation. Modern communications has a lot of misinformation and disinformation in it. Misinformation is just wrong information. That's product. Disinformation is deliberate misinformation, where somebody's made the choice to try to deal with that in a different. Disinformation has been with us for a long time. For hundreds of years, it's been primarily the province of the state. But now it's being used by all kinds of groups and individuals along the way. Misinformation is just somebody passes on something they think or saw and they were just wrong about what they're perceived. And there's a lot of that going around because now with the social media and others, it can spread very rapidly before somebody says, oh, wait a minute, that's just wrong. And it's not necessarily deliberate, it's not necessarily nefarious, but it is harmful along the way. And so how do you control that by still getting a good flow of information in society and in the world is a big issue. And finally, we're wrestling with huge conflicts in national and global governments of communications. Nobody really controls the international communication systems that exist out there. There is no Ministry of Communications at the United Nations. We don't have that kind of thing, yet we're making decisions are being made about the internet, about telephone internet, all these other things that are being made often by private companies without any particular governance going on over it. It's an interesting kind of problem. It used to be that nations didn't think that they could control internet communications. And right now, there are 47 nations that are bringing actions against Facebook and Google for their practices online because they've discovered ways to address it at a national level. And so they're struggling with that, and they're struggling at in between different countries. Some want a stronger regulation, some want a less regulation. Those are all coming in very different ways. And so these are the kind of conflicts that are occurring because all of these constituent changes that are taking place and are taking place all at the same time. And so with that, I'll stop, and I'd be happy to discuss or listen to your ideas, or to answer questions you have, or explain something that others may have. So, Anna?
Thank you very much, Professor Picard, for amazing presentation, for very thought-provoking, very interesting presentation. And thanks for speaking about not only contemporary trends, but also about the future trends, about the trends for development, about the how everything is going to be in the future. So thanks very much. I'm sure we all really enjoyed listening to your talk, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions at the end. So just as a reminder, if you have a question, you're welcome to type your question in the chat box or raise your virtual hand after both talks. So now, if you allow me, I will introduce our next speaker, Professor Elena Vartanava, who is Dean and full professor at the Faculty of Journalism of Lomonosov Moscow State University. She is also academician of the Russian Academy of Education and president of the National Association of Mass Media Researchers. Her papers appeared in Journalism, European Journal of Communication, Journalism and Mass Communicator Educator, and other journals. Her recent books include Encyclopedia of the Global Media Industry and Media System of Russia. She is also an author of over 400 academic publications, including journal articles, books, and edited collections. She is also a member of many different academic associations, including IMCR, ICA, ICREA, IMA, EMMA, ESTA, and many other associations. She is also the founder and the first chair of the Digital Divide Working Group in IMCR. Above that, her research interests focus on the Russian media system, media economics, media theory, journalism education, digital inequalities, and other topics. So today, Professor Vartanava will be talking about the advantages and disadvantages of digital media consumption, new dictatorship of the audience. Professor Vartanava, the floor is yours now. Thanks very much for your talk.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Anna. And definitely thank you, Robert, for this brilliant talk and brilliant, brief, but very deep description of what is going on. And let me not to concentrate on the broader trends and shift now to the situation we have in Russian media studies related to the concept of audience. Though digitalization has brought about a lot of new meanings to the concept of audience, Russian media studies have been developing from a kind of 0 point in the independent Russia. In the Soviet Union, the journalism studies were linked to journalism education and focused primarily on journalistic texts, not on those who are using these texts. Only at the later stage, the sociological approach to audience emerged in order to realize how public opinion and mass consciousness were constructed, operated, and with what results. It is important to say that studying audience in the Soviet media studies have been characterized by low empirical evidence because ideologically the audience was considered to be a passive mass of working people. So only in 1991, when new consumers, when audience has become to be considered as consumers in the economy, audience was considered to be as those who produce new data and and being itself a commodity. The concept became important to pay attention to, both at the market and also in the academia. Audience trends, of course, brilliantly described by Professor Picard, show that in my country, the audience were broadening because of the ideological shift and orientation to market, while technology has brought to the narrowing of audiences. mediatization of the social life and individual practices, routines became a very powerful driver for media use, and this brought to the kind of emergence of a debated but still existing concept of the homo mediatus, who needs new form of literacy to survive in this totally digitalized world. However, though importance of audiences became clear, our research of the main research subjects in dissertations in terms of elements of communication process show that audience still is not an important subject of research, still is missing. Though on the contrary, the Russian media system in the last years has been growingly digitalized, and we see that the main shift has happened in those media, even media communication areas, which are mostly digitalized, while the population is still at the same level regardless of the unification with Crimea. While the television channel penetration is at the same line, the most important rise was internet user in millions, and also the time of average daily media consumption. In 10 years, it grows by 5 hours. Being very short, I would like to underline that the real shift in audience trends happens in the audience of social media, which perhaps leads to the reconfiguration of business as well. Demands for diverse and limitless content, focus on digital media use, which resulting in constructing the digital media life, emergence of digital citizenship, and rising of new social, I would say, generational divisions and tensions. Also, the rise in media socialization is definitely the trends which is demonstrated by the audience. And of course, in parallel with this, the cheap production of limitless non-professional content make audience more than audience, bringing new meanings such as active audience, such as prosumers, new professionals, etc. My colleagues just published a research monograph about media consumption of digital youth in Russia. You can see the cover and the authors on the slide, and you can see that though school children are not totally socially networked and using managers, this change has happened in more elder groups of students. What is important? The new digital audience is trying to fulfill all the important needs which are traditionally associated with traditional media. Media became a real extension, physically, extension of young people, bearing in mind the concept of McLuhan. Young people, Russian youth, is using social media for classical media functions to get information, education, and entertainment. But also it is broadened in terms of using it for socialization and self-actualization. What do young audience really want? It doesn't want, we understand clearly that they don't want traditional media in their traditional forms. The social media use, of course, involve use of digitalized formats of traditional media, either their sites, internet sites of newspapers, or their some programs on the messengers or social media. However, they do not really want to go back to traditional media, and they inbuild this inbuild this traditional media in the digitalized form in their growing environment, which is much more than media space, is going traditional social space. So we are facing, and this is my last slide, we are facing a lot of challenges, and these challenges concern traditional professionalization of journalism as a social mission in the society. Although in some societies we have still some limitations in provision of information by traditional media, alternative voices substitute, but also challenge the professional media in terms of professional standards. Also, new ethics of media communication is challenging traditional issues of social and editorial responsibility. We do agree, all the scholars, that traditional business models are changing and money paid by audience are getting more and more important. However, the competition between traditional media and digital platforms is one of the important factors. What is positive in all this? I think there is one clear positive moment. I would like to finalize my brief talk with this, and this is the really need and attempts of many states to develop digital media education as a way to survive for all generations in this new society. We see how very difficultly is mixed traditional efforts of market-oriented media business and state regulation to support media education and digital media literacy, and perhaps this would be one of the dominant vectors of development in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Vartanava. It's always a very big pleasure to listen to you, and thanks very much for amazing presentation and for sharing your research with us. So it looks like we have around 7 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that, before the end of the seminar. So I encourage you, dear colleagues, to please ask questions. And just as I mentioned, you're welcome to raise your hand or type your question in the chat box, whichever you prefer. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask them. While our colleagues are maybe thinking about questions, let me ask a quick question to both speakers, to Professor Picard and to Professor Vartanava. Both of you have been mentioning the digital literacy, media literacy, digital education, and these aspects. So I was just wondering if you can comment a little bit more on how important you think this digital media education, as Professor Vartanava mentioned, media literacy, digital literacy, if it is the same or if it's probably not the same, how important it is and whether it is important for the young people today, not just for young people, for the audience today in this changing media environment.
Well, educational institutions have always provided education on the important institutions of society. So we have all kinds of education that we get in history and social studies classes and things of that sort. Media have become so central in digital media and the communication systems to all of how society operates, but they've never had that same place in most educational systems. So I think it is critical that we see that developed probably very early, even in primary schools at a low level, but certainly by the time in secondary schools, people need to really understand how these various media and communication systems work.
Thank you. Professor Vartanava, maybe you can also comment here.
I completely agree with Professor Picard, and I would like to add that we have a very, we need to have a very targeted education for different groups of different ages, while the elder generations are more, I would say, more capable to use their critical approach to media. They need more technological training. They need more skills to use all this digital environment, which requires a lot of new attempts. For younger people, on the contrary, it's important to explain their critical framework of all this new media environment. While we may admire how our children and grandchildren use these technologies already being babies. So it is important to get this understanding what is missing in which generation. So Anna, there are more questions, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Vartanava. I see we have one question in the chat box and another question from our student Apollinaria. So let me just first take the question from the chat, since I guess it came sooner. It is a question from Ivan Aslanov, who is asking, what do you think about the problem of fake news and how they affect today's audience? Are they a new trend for journalism? So I guess it's a question for both speakers, so maybe you can comment briefly on that.
That's an excellent question, Ivan. Certainly there's always been fake news. The problem is today, because of the communication system, particularly social media, you can spread it very rapidly. And so how do you deal with that? Well, part of it is what Elena has been arguing for some time, which is the literacy issues along the way. So people say, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. Or what is the source of this information? And when they start looking at, is it coming from a trusted source, or is it coming from some lesser kind of source or source they don't know, they will then want to look at it in a very different way. So I think a lot of it is getting people to understand what is news, what is quality news, and then how do you take a piece of news that you're, that sounds different from what I'm hearing from everybody else, and how do you then confirm it or try to verify it?
Thank you very much, Professor Picard. Professor Vartanava, you want to comment on this question about fake news?
I think let us listen to what Robert responds. He is a very rare guest with us, so maybe we can ask Apollinaria, because I agree with many of his points.
Yeah, Apollinaria, please go ahead.
Thank you. So firstly, I would like to say thank you for these beautiful presentations, for these amazing talks. And I have like a small question for both of speakers, professors. I want to ask about this notion, which is famous by FOMO, like fear of missing out, in the context of media. Is it really worth reacting to all media feeds, trends, or still being more selective, but at the same time losing audience reach? What do you think? Thank you.
Well, the issue of audience reach becomes a measurement of how do you measure it. And are you measuring it on the original platform it came off of, on the original TV broadcast, or on the original? Are you measuring it on when somebody takes it and spreads it on social media? The fact is, most companies are actually reaching much more today than people than they ever did before with their content. The problem is they don't control that reach anymore. Somebody else is controlling it, and so they don't like it. So you have to make your money, if you're going to make money on that smaller amount, if it's a commercial operation, or you have to justify your existence to your funders based on the total rather than just on a single kind of thing. And so it is very hard, because the question is, what are we measuring? And that nobody can agree on. And every media and digital type has a different kind of measurement system Some measure households, some measure individuals, some measure exposure, some measure interaction. You know, it's just really, nobody can agree today on really what is interaction with the content and along the way. And that means both those people, whether it's a state or a license fee or an advertiser or a foundation funding it, all of them need to have something to justify their investment.
I agree, and would like only to add that measuring audience reach is important in terms of both commercial and social effects. And I do agree that we need to know what are the final goal of this management. Today I asked my colleagues how popular is the student newspaper, and they wrote 60 unique visits, 600 unique visits per day. Is it high or low? So what is the impact the student newspaper has? So I do agree, many things are changing.
I think also one of the problems of measurement is that we tend to measure what stories or what content gets the most interest or the most use. And we all know that most of the time that's celebrity, sports, something else. And what we're not measuring is what content is most influential, most significant to society and to people making decisions in their lives. Those are often read by fewer people, but often by people that are able to do something with that information in a different way. And so if all you measure is just the big numbers of, ooh, how many eyeballs did we generate? That's not a very good way of saying, was this important and significant and useful to society?
Thank you very much, Professor Picard, Professor Vartanava. I see we have also a question from Diana, and I'm afraid this is going to be the last question in the series since we are a little bit pressed for time, but we have time just for one last question. So Diana, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Oh, I cannot turn my camera. Can you hear me? Is everything okay?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you for the wonderful presentations. Thank you to both speakers. And I have a very short question regarding the role of traditional media in media education. How do you think, what is the role of traditional media outlets in raising the level of media literacy? Thank you very much.
Well, I think they have the biggest platforms to start doing that, and I think they need to explain. A lot of traditional media have not been very transparent about themselves and about their operations and how they work and how they make decisions. I think they need to become more doing that. But I also think that because they're large, they need to be part of working with the educational institutions and organizations in society that are trying to support media literacy, and they can be very helpful in doing that.
I would say that they have a great impact, and they traditionally have had a great impact. And the only issue is whether they are used or not by young people. So if not used, no impact, but they have an experience. Anna,
thank you.
Do I understand that I may conclude this really very speedy and very intensive and very thought-provoking debate? We are happy, Professor Picard, that you join us in this new initiative, and we would like to invite you in person when all limitations are over and when COVID-19 would be in the past. However, we very much appreciate this opportunity. We continue our topical seminar the first Tuesday of the month, and next seminar we plan for the 5th of October with colleagues from Oslo Metropolitan University and Gothenburg University, the main speaker Oskar Westlund and his colleagues, And exactly the next topical seminar will respond to the last question in our chat box, what about hate speech, etc. So we are about disinformation, fact-checking and platforms. So please pay attention to our information. We are very grateful to IMCR as an organization who is supporting, especially for two groups, working groups of this long-standing partner, Digital Divide Working Group and Communication in Post and Neo-Authoritarian Societies Working Group. We are also grateful to NAMI, National Association for Mass Media Research, who is helping us to organize this event. So thank you very much all. Robert, today was the maximum number of participants we ever had for these seminars, 100, and this is a great result. So dear colleagues, take care, all of you. Take care, stay safe and healthy, and continue your intellectual work. Very nice to see you all. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Vartanava, Professor Picard. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, colleagues.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.